The next portion of our exciting program is the CAPS Alumni Panel. And once you become a CAPS Fellow, you never stop being a CAPS Fellow. You already got a little taste of that for those of you who came to the dinner last week. You will be called on in all sorts of situations. The university thinks very highly of you as a group, and so do we. But this is one of the most important exploitations of the Alumni Network, which is to help you prepare for your own summer. And we're delighted to have 5 of our fellows here. We'll just start by having you each just say your name and where you served. And if it was a specific role within an organization, mention that too.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Knippenberg, and last summer I served at National Lutheran Communities and Services in Rockville, Maryland as a strategy fellow.
Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Albers. I was also at National Lutheran Communities and Services in Rockville, Maryland. I worked under the Chief Philanthropy Officer, so I was their philanthropy intern. I'm Katie Bernabei. I was at Concordia Place in Chicago, and I worked with the advancement department, so I did a little bit of everything.
My name is Miranda Joebgen. I served with Lutheran Services in America in Washington, D.C. last summer doing marketing and development.
I picked the last place in the panel so I can think the most about the answers. So this is a hard one. So I'm Lars. So I'm Lars Anderson. I was a CAPS Fellow in Austin, Texas for Water to Thrive. And I guess I was just kind of their technical intern for the summer. Also had a travel component to it. So.
Thank you, Lars. And we already have a question for you that will come from the group. Well, actually, why don't we just ask it now? Kristen,
I was just wondering how you logged hours when you were in Ethiopia.
Yeah, so I did it. How did I do it? It was more or less. It was more or less.
It took me a long time to think about this.
I think it was probably about like a third of the time I was there I counted as work, because for all the time that I was there, really the only time I counted as work was when we were actually with communities directly. Okay. So whenever it was like traveling, I didn't count, or touring and traveling and driving, I didn't count that as hours. So that's pretty much what I did.
While we're on the subject of hours, how did the hours piece work? Was it like something that was sort of dominating your psyche all the time and you were worrying about it? Or was it a sort of flexible thing? How did the hours piece feel to you? Katie, maybe you'd like to?
Well, for my site, it was pretty flexible. So it was kind of like work when you want to, as long as you get your 300 hours done. So I would come in around like 8:30 every morning, and then most days I would leave at 4, some days I would leave earlier. It just kind of depended based on what events were happening and that I had to be at, or if I wanted to do something else with my time. And they were pretty flexible as long as I communicated with them what I was doing and I was getting all the work that I needed to be done.
Did anybody else have a very different experience of hours? So that pretty much sums it up. Hannah?
Our supervisor was more concerned about us going over hours than meeting the amount of hours that we had. So we had some flexibility sometimes, like if we were like, I'm not really accomplishing anything, so I'm just going to go home. I also traveled a lot with my fellowship. So as Lars said, I didn't count those hours in my total number of hours, because then I would have gone over the allotted amount. So our supervisor was very careful on making sure we weren't exceeding the amount of hours. So I would say it was flexible, and there was plenty of opportunity to work. And if you have a clocked position, like a time card on campus, I loved being able to go in at 8, take an hour lunch break when I wanted to, and stay until 5 or 6, or leave at 3:30, depending on what was going on during the day. So it allowed more flexibility during the day too, which is nice.
Thank you. So to go from the very sort of logical, logistical, and technical to the more grand and life-changing, and Miranda, I'd love to start with you on this. How did this experience set you up for the next steps in your time at VU or post-graduation? How did it inform your choices? I think your story is, it's a distinctive one, so I'm calling you out on it.
So my experience was a little bit different than some other panelists because while some of my colleagues were kind of still figuring out what they wanted to be doing with their life, I was in a unique position of I knew that I wanted to be a pastor. So I kind of had my vocation part already figured out, but my experience with CAPS allowed me to spend time doing something that, while I knew I wouldn't be doing it for the rest of my life, it provided me with really valuable job experience and learning what other types of vocation are like and what other kinds of service are like, and it really allowed me to learn more about what Lutheranism is outside of the church and things like that. And it gave me some ideas to think about what I wanted to do with my gap year after I graduated.
You, Lars?
Yeah, what was really cool about mine is the chance to see the different kind of vocations and work and jobs of people involved in all circles of development work. So, when I got to go to Ethiopia, I had a chance to see, how direct, implementation is kind of working and seeing the exact kind of technical side of engineers and hydrogeologists and people like this. So that was really neat for me to kind of absorb all that while I was there, and then kind of came home and for the rest of the 8 weeks was involved directly with the nonprofit itself and saw the administrative side in some way, and then also was doing my own thing with writing a document, which I can talk about later. But that was really neat to get the whole experience of what kind of goes through, or what the process is of doing hopefully successful development work. So.
Did you find it was raising questions for you or about your next steps and impacting those in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was interesting to kind of, see that side abroad and then think, okay, well, this is more where the things that I'm learning are kind of more applicable here and less so on the business and, communications and donor relations side of America. But so kind of reconciling those was really helpful for me and kind of deciding, well, do I want to kind of go directly into training or thinking about training people abroad and working on that engineering side, or can I stay kind of in a healthy mix of both as I kind of was this summer too. So.
Emily, would you like to comment on how your experience set you up in a positive way or negative way, informed the choices you were making either for this year or the future?
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a nursing major. And my experiences at Valpo has set me up to ask questions about why things happen in healthcare the way that they do. So I went into the CAPS Fellowship looking to get experience with health policy. And I had no idea the extent to which that would become a reality. And over my fellowship, I was embedded within writing primary care policy and trying to figure out how do we actually make the changes with the problems in our healthcare in our nation. As a result of that, I got hands-on exposure of another side of the medical world and started to see how maybe I could mesh both clinical nursing with policy writing and practice, and now have taken on a year-long position at the placement that I had in my fellowship and will be headed back in the fall to continue working on the project that I had over the past summer.
So that's just an example of some of the kinds of insights and learnings that might come out of your experience. I wonder if any of you would like to offer some ideas on what you wish you had known going in. So we just talked about what you've learned coming out, but what do you wish you had known going in that you didn't know? And Hannah, I'm going to let you take the first step.
Honestly, I don't know if anything rightly sticks out to me. If you haven't been in an office setting before and you're going into an office setting, ask questions about that. So when it is open, ask what that's like and what expectations are in an office setting. I had been exposed to that, so that was something that was a little bit easier of a transition. If you're going into more of a field placement, make sure you ask questions about that. You're not going to be in an office 8 to 5, some of you. So what does that look like, and how do you clock hours that way? I will say I know there's some new placements, which I think is really exciting, and I know there's some repeating placements. I don't know. Out of my personal experience, I think it's best to go in with what you hope to get out of the experience, and try not to replicate what others have had there, because your experience is going to be so different than what we've had as alumni. So ask as many questions as you want, but I don't know. I hope my answers are more general in terms of the CAPS program, and less specific on exactly things that I took out of it, if that makes sense. So,
Katie, would you like to?
Yeah, so I second Hannah's comment about asking questions. So be sure to ask, like, what's the attire, what kind of office environment is it, so that you know what you're walking into and you're not like kind of out and not fitting in. And then also ask if there's something that you're interested in doing and like it hasn't really been offered to you, like ask. Just say, hey, like I noticed this project and I think it's super cool. Can I get involved in that somehow? And most of the time they'll say yes and like try to help you with that because that's part of their learning agreement as well. But just ask, like if there's something that you want to be doing, go for it, ask, and they will probably accommodate you. And then also, I guess, get involved in your community. So, like I was in Chicago in a specific neighborhood, and there were different events that we would go to in the neighborhood, and that was really cool, getting to see who was there and why they were coming out, and getting to know the place that you're working in is just as important as getting to know the organization you're working with. So just doing both, getting to know what you're doing and then getting to know where you're living and getting to know the people that are around there, because that's going to offer a really cool experience as well.
Other panelists want to offer some advice?
Yeah, I would add to that the importance of knowing how quickly it's going to go and how kind of intentional you have to be with kind of goal setting and knowing what you want to get done consistently. I mean, I learned it quickly, probably like third week on, that I kind of started off a little bit rockier and not having like set those goals and set what I wanted to get done every week. And so I think the importance of knowing that right away and knowing you only have 8 to 10 weeks and how do you want to use that time to the best of your ability is really important. And I set aside a really kind of, I think third weekend, a really important like outline basically of what needed to get done here and here and here. We didn't stick to it perfectly, but having that was really important, and I think most of you might know that already, but make sure you do that initially too.
Yeah, I would just add that they're not expecting you to automatically know everything that you're planning on doing that summer. Like, they're not expecting you to come in and be like a fully trained professional. That's not the expectation that's there. Like, I was working on a lot of development work, which is fundraising and learning like donor analysis and a lot of numbers stuff. And I met with one of my supervisors the first day, and we were talking about this, and I'm feeling really overwhelmed because I'm like, I really don't know any of this, and I've never done this before, and I don't know if I'm really qualified to be here. And she just was really willing to like sit down with me and explain to me exactly what I needed to do and how it needed to get done. And this was much more, not much more, but it was a very equal learning opportunity for both of us. So I was really able to learn a lot from them as much as my work was valued there, which I think is really important to remember.
And that's good too, to be able to meet with your supervisor or people initially and right away. So I couldn't have done any of that without having wrestled with kind of what they were telling me I was going to be doing this summer and started to plan that out. So it's good.
Just don't be afraid to ask questions.
Emily, do you want to add anything to that?
It'll be a lot of echoing of what everyone said, but don't be afraid to admit when you don't know things and to ask and to also be confident as well when you do know things. You're all at the point where you were selected to be CAPS Fellows for a reason, and that you have skills and abilities and insight that are very powerful and impactful for the position that you're going to enter into. So you as a fellow are bringing something to the table, and I think I was surprised by the amount of trust and responsibility that I was given as a fellow and that I was looked at as a valued team member, as opposed to just, oh, the intern shadowing in the office. So I think there's a lot of strength in being able to be open and say, I don't know how to do this, can you help me? Or say, I'd like to do this, how can I get there? as well as recognizing that you're absolutely in your position for a reason and you are a valued member of the team wherever you're at.
I think I would add advice from the perspective of somebody who's been a supervisor of interns, and it actually goes back to probably the best advice I got when I was in graduate school. This came from my dad. So I was doing my doctoral exams at the University of Chicago for a PhD, and I had to go in front of a group of faculty and have them ask me questions. And he had been a professor at a seminary, and he said, Elizabeth, the faculty are really nervous about their performance in front of one another. So go in there and make them feel good about what they're doing, and pay attention to them, and help them be good examiners of you. And I have followed that advice perpetually in my life. And I think you can take that advice going in and working with your supervisor. That person is anxious about them doing a good job with you. And they probably are a little strapped for time and psychic space and anxious about that you're going to soon discover the disorder in their office. And if you can understand that and be giving them room to grow as supervisors, it will be a really helpful mutual relationship. So, yeah, help them be good supervisors. Does that make sense of your experience?
And I would add on to that, going off of Emily's point and what others have said, the Institute sets you up really well for that. So you're going into a position not as an intern, you're going in as a CAPS fellow. And your supervisors have been told, Allie, and you can ask Allie what she communicates with them, but they know that this is not simply me coming in to do intern work. This is more than that. It's more than just an internship.
More than an internship.
I was trying to avoid saying it, but it really is. So they oh gosh, you're gonna hear that through the rest of the night. But they know that going in. So I think that was also something I was surprised by, that I think I would have liked to know, looking back on what you were saying, because we were treated as part of the team. I was a part of staff meetings, and I had agenda items on the staff meetings. And part of the reason is because there's been CAPS fellows before you that have had that reputation of being able to contribute as a staff member. So they have that expectation for you. And exactly what Dr. Lynn said, my supervisor was always checking in with me to make sure that she was giving me work that I wanted to do and that I appreciated doing as well. So it was a very mutual relationship.
But things don't always work out as one might hope, and this may be a harder question for this particular group, but what if the organization turns out not to be a good fit? I mean, there are a fair number of new placements here, folks who haven't been, and also if you're going into a place where there's already been a placement, the staff may have changed. In a couple of cases, there are former CAPS fellows on the staff. How do you creatively cope with situations where it doesn't feel like a good fit? Any experience there that you could draw on?
I mean, so if the work you're doing isn't a good fit, then talk to your supervisor and see if you can get different work that more fits with what you like to do, and that is more interesting to you. So you can always do that.
I would say internship experiences for me is it's about learning a lot, but it's about learning things that you like and things that you don't like. So an experience that might not feel like a good fit, you're learning something from that. You're learning that it's not a good fit. Whether that's the work that you're doing or the type of company culture that's there, and you're like, nah, I'm not really feeling this. So still, my suggestion would be still view it as a learning experience, and try, as a cliche would be, but try to make the most of it because you're there. And as Katie said, start a conversation. But it is an internship. It's not a permanent job placement. You're there for 8 to 10 weeks, so you can do anything for 8 to 10 weeks.
So in that, I would say it's important to manage your expectations and be critical with them too. Because if you think, I think I had definitely, I felt a little bit like I had failed at the end of the summer because we didn't quite finish this document that I really wanted to finish. It was about 40 pages at the end of it, which was a success in itself. But it was just like, wow, we really wanted to finish that and have it like kind of published and ready to move. But towards the end of it, I was just like, okay, let's think about what the expectations actually were, and if I met those well with my supervisors, and kind of came to the conclusion that I did, and that it was just kind of other factors that failures of communication, issues with kind of Skyping and emailing and stuff that also contributed to that not being quite finished as I wanted it to. So I'll say just kind of put your expectations up there and be really critical about what they are, and make sure you're on track with your supervisor as well.
So Lars, when you were checking with those expectations, where did you look to find them? Had you written them down? Were they in the learning agreement or in, your...
Yeah, well, maybe part of it was difficult because in my initial description it was that task plus another one. So it was like, oh, so I'm hardly even going to get the first of 2 done that I was planning for initially. But then as I kind of realized that and was talking to Dick and Suzanne, it was that became a much more important task than what they needed right now, and that Krista or someone like Krista would come along and be able to take on the reins after that. So.
And I think too, don't measure yourself against what other fellows are doing. So you're all doing very different work, and so when you Skype in with everybody or like reading people's blog posts, don't be like, oh, I'm not doing that, so like I'm not doing what the CAPS Fellows program is supposed to be doing. Like, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Like, I was more in an office setting. Lars was traveling to Ethiopia. Like, we had different experiences, but they were all valuable in their own ways. And so, just remember that too. Like, don't be like, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing because I'm not doing it like this person, and it's gonna be fine. You are doing what you're supposed to be doing.
And I'd also say, utilize the CAPS fellows around you.
Yeah.
I think that also goes back to what I wish I had known going in, was how much of a family I actually had at my disposal, even if they weren't living with me. And so while everyone's experiences are so different, that also served as a motivation of, even if I'm not doing that, look at how cool these things are that people are doing, and getting to talk and share your experiences and know that people are experiencing the struggles and the successes and all of the emotions that you are in very different ways. And so there's this solid cohort that is able to understand what you're going through and to talk with your experiences about and bounce ideas off of. I wish that I had taken the chance to talk more with CAPS Fellows during the CAPS Fellowship than I did. So I would say definitely reach out to your other CAPS Fellows, even outside of the civic reflections and the mandatory meetings that you have.
Yeah, and then reach in time back to the CAPS Fellows who served in the organization that you're in, if that's the case. I mean, I think I don't mind volunteering you for that, and
I'm not okay with that.
I would like to ask about the question, the role of faith or faith identity. This is not a program that assumes that, either in the CAPS Fellow or in the organization, but many of the organizations that we draw upon are part of what we call the Lutheran ecology, which is a kind of a lovely term to describe all of these organizations started by Lutheran congregations at various times. Others, I think, have other faith connections or not. So I'm just wondering, how did that play in or not? I'm thinking actually all 5 of you were at organizations that had some connection to the Lutheran ecology. But any thoughts on that? Observations, advice about how to help people negotiate that if they do or don't feel connected to, if there is a faith identity?
So for my organization, which was Lutheran Services in America, it was, the faith identity of it was definitely a part of the founding of the organization and kind of the base structure of the organization. But I definitely wouldn't say that it was a part of the day-to-day activities and life of the members who worked there. So it's a Lutheran organization, but I think that there were maybe, like, including myself, maybe like 2 or 3 Lutherans that were working there at the time. I'm pretty sure that the CEO was a Lutheran, but I don't think that any of my supervisors were or anything. The other intern that was there with me was. So it definitely wasn't like a requirement, like you have to be Lutheran to work here. Like that wasn't how it was. And like we would start our staff meetings with a prayer, but really outside of that, you could find a faith component in it if you wanted to, but it also wasn't forced on you. And that was kind of another part of my CAPS experience, was that I very much found my own faith experience through it, but it wasn't necessarily one that was mandated in it.
I think it was interesting for me, so we were at an organization called National Lutheran Communities and Services, and it was definitely a good exposure of what does the faith look like within the corporate atmosphere, especially when a Christian or other faith-based name is in the title. Does that actually come across in what you're doing? Is that part of the day-to-day operations, like Miranda was talking about, when you have a prayer or when you don't? And what are the appropriate times to express your own faith? So I think that was just a good learning experience all around of what does this mean as who you are as an individual and as your organization as a whole. I think externally as well, there's all types of different opportunities for exploration and for, like Hannah and I would go around Washington, D.C. and find different churches each Sunday and try to find different places to grow in our own faith in that way. But it is definitely a learning experience. I had never been in a situation before where I was both in a corporate office with a faith-based background and trying to figure out what does that look like in real time. So I don't know if that answers anything, but this is a good thing to figure out.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing to possibly, I don't know this for sure, but you could find out, like have a conversation with your supervisor about if you have questions, if you don't know whether, what the organization's orientation is, and you want to learn more, because people don't always talk about religion in this world, and so sometimes it's a good thing just to get it out there if that's either something that you are uncomfortable with the possibility of being present or would naturally assume was present and aren't sure how it's going to be negotiated. So I think it's something that at Valpo as a university gets talked about more than in a lot of contexts. And you may find yourself, as one CAPS fellow did in 2014, in an organization that didn't talk about it at all, and she was somewhat nonplussed by it at first, I think. But it will be different for everybody.
To follow that as well, thinking back, one question I asked my supervisor going in was, what was the role of faith in the organization? And that was just a nice question to know the answer to going in, so I knew the culture and what the expectations were and how the office itself was run. So I at least had a gauge of how does this fit? And the answer may be faith is really strong, or it might be faith isn't really a thing here. But at least if you're unsure, then you have an idea going into it of what that culture will be like.
Yeah, Charlie.
How much of that faith would be included in like the reflections, blogs, / Google Hangouts? Was that like a big discussion, or was it more day-to-day activities? Take that anywhere.
I didn't really talk about it in my blog posts or in the reflections, I don't think. Did I remember?
I think,
Yeah. I think it depends on your group and what kind of conversations you get into, and if that's important to you, and if that's something you want to discuss. There's always a possibility of it being there, but it doesn't have to be.
and I would, like Katie said, very individual based on what your experiences are and how you want to reflect on that. So if it's something that you want to talk about, then talk about it, and that's totally okay. I think it's something that's welcomed in both the reflections and the blog posts. because it's really about what your personal experiences are and then bringing that to the table. And that's kind of the goal of the reflections, and that's the goal of the blog posts, is to share what your experiences are. So if it's something that you find missing or something that you want to talk about, either way, it would be something to, those would be opportunities to explore that.
Yeah, I would just say for the Institute for Leadership and Service, we are within campus ministries, sort of that division. You can see the chapel here. But we're not a specifically Christian ministry. We understand that we are in an interfaith and multi-faith, and in some cases non-faith community of learning at Valpo University. But we think that this idea of vocation and calling and of finding something that really answers your deepest values is essential for all of us. We believe in that. It's a concept that that we've been able to help articulate through the Lutheran concept of vocation, which is grounded in love of God and neighbor, but we think it's a broader language of a life of commitment that all of our students, wherever you're coming from, in your own values and journey, can benefit from. So it's not assumed that everybody who participates in this is Christian or religious. It's a changing university, and we recognize that students have different kinds of commitments that bring them into a work of service and leadership. And so we hope you will talk with each other about what those commitments are wherever you're coming from. Does that make sense? It's one of the things I really love about this institution is that we do talk about faith commitments, but we do that with the understanding that we can pursue truth in different ways and vocation in different ways. Other questions from the group for the panel? Yeah, Leandro.
Yeah, so Ali was telling us a little bit ago about the peer mentor aspect within the CAPS Fellowship. I was curious on what your experiences was with that, or what you were able to do to make that useful for both yourself and your mentor.
You're talking about the alumni mentor?
What's the term? Is that the term?
Yeah, alumni
Okay.
mentor. In some cases, they were
Yeah.
more like Mr. Bear, and they were
Yeah.
not all peers.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
see. That.
But they're of all different ages and generations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's at Upbring? Is there anyone at Upbring? No one? Ah, shoot. Anyway, my alumni mentor has a position at Upbring and is in Austin as well. And he was we met very consistently, and it was a very cool part of my summer to have kind of that really cool mentorship aspect where he's kind of coming from the background of a nonprofit organization and looking at that administrative side of things too. And then I'm kind of starting to enter into that and realize what that's like. And so it was cool to share that experience with him and try to understand that together. And then I think also, Charlie, some of the faith component came in there too. That was where kind of the one-on-one cool conversations could happen for that as well. So that was a great aspect for me. And food every time, so great lunches, great things in Austin. So.
Other comments on the alumni mentor experience?
Well, so my alumni mentor was my supervisor as well, so it was kind of an interesting situation, but it worked out really well because that relationship was kind of there from the get-go. So I would say, as Lars said, if you are a type of person that may be asking those faith-type questions or more self-discovery questions isn't something that you feel comfortable doing with a supervisor in a work setting, that's where your alumni mentor comes in. Because it is a more personal conversation than what you'll have in those reflections with your cohort. And it's a person that has experience in the field that knows the environment that you're coming from. Whether they graduated 50 years ago, 5 years ago, or somewhere in between, the character of Valpo it has a similar reputation. So they know the type of environment that you're coming from. They're familiar again with the program and the type of experience that you're having. So those are going to be questions that are a little bit more prompted in that conversation. So for me, that was where I got more of those like life advice or self-discovery questions out, and was able to have a more personal conversation with my alumni mentor, who happened to be my supervisor.
No conflict of interest there.
I think the alumni mentor component is a really, really valuable opportunity in that you have this individual who you can tap into to learn about the possibilities for future endeavors, whether it's something that you personally want to pursue or just learning about the story of your alumni mentor. I happened to know my alumni mentor before going into the summer, and that was an excellent time to just get to know her better, and we still continue our relationship now. But I took the time to ask questions about, what did you do after college? What was that transition like from college to the real world, or college to grad school, or whatever it may be, and find out about how has your alumni mentor navigated the waters having gone forth from Valpo. So I think it's just this rich opportunity where you get to hear about the stories of incredible Valpo alumni who have come before you, and Valpo alumni who are personally invested in you succeeding as an individual as well. So it's a really cool match program and a really awesome additive to the CAPS Fellowship as a whole.
Katie or Miranda, do you want to add anything?
All good.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would just say, help your alumni mentor be a good alumni mentor. Remember that that person is probably, this is a new role, they're nervous, they want to know they did well. So that adults are insecure too. And so, I know you're all adults, but adults who have graduated are insecure too. And want to figure out how to relate and how to be helpful. And Valpo is still working on figuring out how to connect alums to the institution, to the students. And we think the Institute for Leadership and Service can be really helpful with that. We think this is a somewhat, I know there are alums who connect with the different colleges very specifically through your field. But the opportunity to connect with the life journey and with the fulfillment of the self and the mission of leadership and service in the world, that's a deeper calling. Again, I think when Lowell Bear was talking, that was part of what was being drawn out in him that he hadn't talked about in any other setting before. And so this is part of what you're doing, is helping alums connect with you and with the institution and continue. We just actually, when we met with the Guild, this group of, it's mostly alums, who have formed sort of a giving circle to support particular projects, and one is the CAPS Fellows program. They're folks more my age, and they were saying, we really need to think about our pathway to purpose, and we really need to think about our leadership and service, and what are we going to be doing in the future, and could you come and do a civic reflection with us on reimagining our service? So they're also thinking about, what do I want to be doing 5 years from now? And so you're a conversation partner who's closer to the world of study and learning and thought than they may have been in a while, and you may be able to offer, suggest a book, or something, some idea that you've learned that might be helpful to them too. Other questions? Yeah, Charlie.
This is more for the office-based people. How much overlap was there with projects on the weekends or fundraising activities? And what was kind of the expectation with that?
I did, so I started earlier than a lot of my cohort did, because Concordia Place had this huge fundraiser in the last weekend of May, but it was during the week, so I didn't have to go on weekends or do anything. But for that event, I was expected to be there and kind of stay late for that day. And there were a few other times where they had kind of office parties later at night, and so I was invited to those, but it wasn't expected that I go. But I think if there's some sort of fundraising event, it just depends on the organization and kind of what your role is in that. But I don't think a lot of us really worked on weekends unless there was some sort of event that we were required to be at.
I would say you are a staff member. Treat yourself as though you are a staff member for those 8 to 10 weeks. So as a staff member, would you be expected to go? You should probably be there. If you're concerned about hours, then that's something that you would talk with your supervisor about and say, hey, listen, I'm not going to come in until 10 because I'm going to go over my hours. Something I discovered because I would work like fundraising events in the evening, or like I said, I traveled some. So I had a few overnight trips with my supervisor, and where was I going with that? But it was that, I mean, I didn't have anything else to be doing. It's not like you're at school when you have class to get to and you're trying to balance all these other things around. You're there to work. So a lot of times, like, even if I worked an event in the evening, I'm like, well, okay, I won't come in until 10, but what am I going to do until 10? Like, I might as well go to work. So that's how I processed it. But if it's something you're concerned about, like I said, those events are fun to go to, usually. Generally, they're free food. You're the intern. You generally get to take home the leftovers. It's a win-win situation.
I'd also say remember that your office is not school and your work is not homework. So give yourself the grace to be able to step away from the office at the end of the day and to not take work home with you. There might be a time where you are so involved in a project and you just want to keep going. That's fine, but I had to tear myself away from the desk at the end of the day and say, no, I need to leave the office at the office. Go take your weekends when you have them. Go do fun things and let the office be at the office, and then you can come back.
That was actually my question. So one thing myself and a few other fellows were excited about is that we don't have, I guess, the pull of both, like we do here at school, schoolwork, and then extracurriculars and having to balance that. We have like a set time when we're working and then we're at home. So how has that been? Like, I know you're in different areas, so I know social life must have been different depending on where you were, but are there any kind of takeaways for doing that well?
I mean, definitely use that time. Like, don't just like try to fill that time with other work and like find things for yourself to do. Like, give yourself that break. Like, you've been working the entire day, so when you get home at night, like, take that time. And if you need to like take personal time to rest, take personal time to rest. If you're living with roommates, you're in DC, so you're probably living with other CAPS fellows, which is really great. So like, I was in DC and I had this group of really awesome roommates. Like, we didn't know each other beforehand. We were like best friends by the end of the summer. It was amazing. And so we would try to work together, like find different things to do in DC, and like it was such a cool place. We would go out for restaurants and free activities, and we would try to soak up as much of DC as we could, because that was just as much a part of our experience as our work was.
I'm wondering if anybody was taking summer class maybe. How many because I'm taking 3 classes during the summer, and I know I can be like top 30. I don't know how do you get balance classes and the best way.
Can I count it? Are all 3 classes at the same time?
Well, 2 on the first time.
Okay.
Did you go during both terms or just the first?
I had 2 during just the first.
I mean, you're the first we heard of it.
I would say you're working full-time, which is exhausting. If you haven't worked 8 to 5 before, it's more tiring than you think, and that's going to take you a few weeks to get used to. And it takes away from that extra time that you have. So there were times when Emily and I were both taking classes during the first session, and then the third person out in our area was studying for the LSAT the second session. First time you heard of that too. But there were some nights where like Emily or Tommy would go out and do something and I couldn't go because I had a homework assignment due. It depends on the classes that you're taking and how you structure your time. But as you said, CAPS is your first priority. So you still have to be in the office at 8:30 the next morning, and you still have to stay until 5 that night. And you have the time in between to get the work done that you need to get done. So that is it. I wish I wouldn't have had to take classes because the second part of summer was definitely more fun and more enjoyable and much more relaxing than the first part because I did have to take away time from that. So.
Charlie?
So, going off that, were any of you, I know you're nursing and Lars are engineering, but are the other three business? Because, no,
No business.
you were, did you use this for your internship requirement?
I did not. I fulfilled that when I studied abroad.
Oh, okay.
I'm using mine for mine,
Okay.
for business, yeah.
Because I was wondering, because there is like journaling required for the business school, I was wondering if there was any overlap.
The blog I don't know what the journaling looks like for the business school, so.
It's like a daily journal. It should work with
Okay.
it. I know that Deb Singer, I talked with her about promoting the program in the College of Business. So if she sends out an email about it, she's our internship coordinator, chances are that it's probably going to work out. And I think the journaling, if I remember correctly, it's like, I don't know, when I studied abroad, I wrote like a sentence a day of what I did that day. So I don't, and study abroad is a little bit different with that, so I would talk with Deb before you leave to see what the requirements are for that.
Yeah, and a blog is just a social form of a journal,
Yeah.
right? It's just the new term for journals.
So you might be able to double dip.
And there is, did you mention the reflect out as well as the
Briefly,
reflect
I didn't call
in?
it that, but
So welcome to the clever naming world of CAPS. So the reflect in is when you all talk with each other, and reflect out is when you, at the end, write your reflection essay to complete the requirements of the CAPS fellowship and get your final $400 payment. Right. So that could be, I mean, your journal would just be fodder for that. Yeah. Any other questions? Things that you really don't want to ask, but you're asking? Yes, thank
I
you.
wonder what Lars's experience was like being in a city without any other
Yeah,
fellows.
yeah, I was about to say that. So I had a really actually cool connection with an organization similar to CAPS, except they place people in organizations, nonprofits in Austin alone. So I got a chance to like meet with them. I think it was weekly, if I remember. So that was pretty cool. But I found that even in that time, it was hard to connect with people that fast, especially since I went to Ethiopia for the first 2 weeks. So I really only had 8 weeks to kind of make friends. So it was a little more difficult, but I think towards the end of it, it started changing a little bit. But I was able to stay connected with a lot of CAPS fellows and people from home, and the other intern I worked with and I were pretty tight, so we hung out a lot. But yeah, so I mean, it's important to like try to connect out and especially meet the people, young people in your organization, and then also see if you can find, if it's like church groups or small groups or service groups even, outside of that would be really a good opportunity for you guys to make some friends in a new place.
Yeah, like Indianapolis is a new setting. There will be a couple of people there, and there may well be interesting networks. There's something called Indie Hub, which is a young professionals gathering site, spot. But I think that you think of yourselves as voyagers for the future CAPS fellows who come out, finding those networks.
And also, my advice too for people who are kind of like alone in cities. So I lived at home during my internship and like wasn't really around any CAPS fellows. But I would try to stay in contact with like a few people that you know or met today and are like, you're super cool and I want to talk to you. But just try to like make those connections so that you're also sort of involved in the community, even if it's not like a physical, like you're in the same space. But if you're talking and kind of sharing what you're experiencing, That's better than sitting at home, like talking to your mom and dad who have no idea what's happening.
I was gonna say, another thing that can be helpful as well, wherever you're placed, is typing in like free activities of the summer for that location. Because there are a lot of really fun, free social gatherings or different events that you can get connected in, especially for those who are in DC or Chicago or Indy. Those major areas have a lot of fun activities over the summer.
And even Northwest Indiana.
So it's not boring in the summer. There are some fun things to do.
One more comment, and that is about the learning agreement and the initial placement description. Those two documents are your best friends, and you should use them early and often. You really want to get in the habit of meeting with your supervisor and looking at what they said your description actually is, recognizing it can change. But use that to open up conversation and questions. It will help them because they're probably very busy. And so it gives you, remind them there is a structure here. Can we talk about this? And it will provide some structure for that conversation. So use that as well as Allie as your friend. So any other questions? We just got a minute or comments that anybody wants to make before we break briefly.
Can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
It kind of goes along with that though. So they joked around at the beginning that you will be exploited as a CAPS fellow, but I also encourage you to exploit the Institute for everything that they offer. But I mean, the staff that works in the Institute and the programs that you have when you come back really utilize this relationship that you're building with the CAPS program to continue that on, specifically if you are going to be a student returning. I know that's something that all 5 of us have done, and hopefully it shows we're able to joke around with the staff, and it's fine. But it's been a really, I think that has been something as a continuation of my CAPS fellowship that I really appreciated, is becoming a friend of the Institute and getting involved in their other programs that they have. So utilize this if you aren't already. Utilize this fellowship as a stepping stone towards that, specifically if you're returning as a student.
And that would certainly be our hope too. We're very excited to see this as the beginning of a longer-term relationship. Last year, through the funding of the Guild, we purchased a book. Did you mention this already when I stepped out? Sorry. Okay. We purchased a book for everybody to take with them. This year, we think that we'll give you the book at the end of your fellowship, and that it could be used as the basis for some optional conversations if you are here, or if you're not and you want to do it by Google Hangout for you after the fellowship. And I think it'll probably focus on leadership, because one of the things we've really noticed with the CAPS fellows is you guys come in often thinking about service, and you leave thinking about leadership. Because you find yourself in an organization where leadership, for better or worse, is really going to shape the experience of the people you're with and the actual work of the organization. So it will raise questions for you about leadership, and we think that might be a nice then further thing to do in the fall, is to talk about the nature of leadership, and that would be a book we'd be providing to you. So yes, there will be, but those are optional. The reflect-ins, the reflect-outs, those are required. Anything else required, Allie? Besides teasing Allie and me and...
That is apparently required.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, well, it's 5 o'clock by the Campanile. We have a 15